The scream tore through the air like a sustained note of pure agony, echoing off the Carrara marble walls and gilded vaulted ceilings of the Thornton estate in the Hamptons. This was not the whiny cry of a spoiled child, this was raw, primal suffering, a metallic sound that signaled something fundamentally wrong was happening. In the center of that obscene opulence lay baby Ethan, writhing in his crib, the 10-month-old heir to a personal fortune exceeding $200 million. His crib was hand-carved from Madagascar mahogany, his blanket woven from Pima silk embroidered with golden thread. Yet all that wealth couldn't buy him a single moment of peace. The mere touch of fabric against his skin sent his tiny body into convulsions of pain, and fresh tears streamed down his face. Sebastian Thornton the father, a man whose cold stare could make grown men confess their sins, whose empire stretched from legitimate businesses to the darkest corners of the underworld, stood helpless by the window. His solid gold Patek Philippe gleamed under the soft light filtering through the curtains. He had spent $2 million on diagnostics. Doctors from the Mayo Clinic, pediatric neurologists from Switzerland, allergy specialists from Johns Hopkins, 15 of the world's finest physicians, had walked through this very room, collected their exorbitant fees, and declared the exact same thing. Clinically, the child is perfectly healthy. All tests are normal. For the first time in his life, money was useless. And that infuriated him more than the screaming. Camille, the mother, a former model whose flawless beauty matched the room surrounding her, sat slumped in an armchair. Her Valentino robe, worth more than most families earned in a year, now wrinkled and stained. 7 weeks without sleeping more than an hour at a time. The purple circles under her eyes were so dark that no amount of expensive concealer could hide them. She lived in constant terror that her son was slowly dying from an invisible disease. "This is the last one," Sebastian said quietly, his voice tight as a wire. "If this nurse turns out to be as useless as the others, we're taking him to Tel Aviv, or I'll burn down every hospital in this country until someone gives me an answer." Beyond the wrought iron gates that guarded the estate like sleeping dragons, an old car was rattling up the driveway. Not a Mercedes S-Class, not an armored Range Rover. It was a white 2008 Honda Civic, so weathered that its headlights looked like tired eyes. The engine coughed and sputtered climbing the slope, then stopped with a screech of worn brakes that shattered the sepulchral silence of the entrance. From inside stepped Scarlett Hayes, a woman wearing scrubs that had seen too many wash cycles, and comfortable but worn-out shoes with thin soles from endless night shifts at the public hospital in Brooklyn. But her deep brown eyes were completely awake, sparkling with a genuine curiosity that money could never buy. She didn't know that in the next few hours, she would discover what $2 million and 15 world-class doctors had missed, a dark truth hidden in the very heart of this billionaire family. This story will change how you see wealth and power forever. If you want to know what Scarlett found, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Share this with someone who needs to hear this, because sometimes the truth hides in the most unexpected places. Harold, the butler in a flawless black suit without a single wrinkle, opened the front door and inclined his head to Scarlett with a brief, efficient nod. He said nothing. He only turned and walked away, silently signaling for her to follow. Scarlett stepped over the threshold, the worn soles of her shoes clicking against marble so polished it looked like a mirror. She kept her face calm, giving nothing away, though inside her chest her heart was beating faster than it should. The hallway stretched out before her like a tunnel of luxury, massive oil paintings mounted along the walls and crystal chandeliers glittering overhead. But Scarlett didn't let herself be distracted. She had come for a child in pain, not to admire someone else's wealth. Harold stopped so abruptly that Scarlett nearly walked into his back. She looked up and saw a woman standing squarely in the middle of the corridor, blocking the way. Victoria Thornton. Even without an introduction, Scarlett could guess exactly who she was. The woman wore an ivory Chanel outfit, a strand of pearls looped around her neck and glowing softly under the lights. Her silver hair was brushed neatly back, and her cold gray eyes raked over Scarlett from head to toe with undisguised contempt. Harold dipped his head slightly and retreated, disappearing into the dimness of the hallway as if he wanted no part of what was about to happen. Victoria stepped forward once, her lips curving into a smile as cold as ice. "So this is what $2 million of failure looks like," she said, her voice thick with mockery. "My son brings in a public hospital nurse." Scarlett felt the disdain in every syllable, but she didn't step back. She had faced bullies far worse than this during the years she'd grown up in foster homes. A wealthy old woman with a string of pearls couldn't make her tremble. "I'm here for the baby, not for your approval," Scarlett replied, calm but firm. Victoria's eyes narrowed. Clearly, she wasn't used to being answered like that. "Little girl," she said, lowering her voice into a threat. "You don't know whose house you're standing in." Scarlett met her gaze without blinking. "I know there's a child suffering. That's all that matters." Victoria's face flushed with anger. She moved closer, close enough that Scarlett could smell the expensive perfume rising from her skin. "If you cause any trouble in this family," Victoria hissed through her teeth, "I'll make sure you never work in medicine again. I know people, powerful people. One phone call and your little career is over." Scarlett didn't move. She had lost too much in her life to be afraid of losing anything else. But before she could answer, a low voice sounded from behind Victoria. "Mother, enough." Sebastian Thornton stepped out of the shadows, his face as hard as stone. He stood nearly a head taller than his mother, and his presence instantly changed the air in the corridor. Victoria turned, her expression a blend of surprise and irritation. "Sebastian, you can't possibly think this girl can help. Look at her. She probably can't even afford the shoes I'm wearing." "What I think is none of your concern," Sebastian said coldly. "Leave us." "But Sebastian," I said, "leave." His voice wasn't loud, but there was a finality in it that made Victoria clamp her mouth shut. She shot Scarlett one more look, gray eyes brimming with hostility and a silent warning, then turned and walked away. Her high heels struck the stone floor like the countdown of a bomb. When Victoria's figure disappeared at the far end of the hallway, Sebastian turned to Scarlett. His face remained unreadable, but there was something in his eyes, a deep exhaustion that money couldn't hide. "Follow me," he said curtly, then turned and walked on. Scarlett followed, feeling Victoria's gaze still burning into her back from somewhere in the shadows. She didn't know that the woman who had just threatened her, the grandmother with the refined appearance and the expensive pearls, was the very source of all the suffering in this house. Sebastian led Scarlett through a heavy oak door and into his private study. The room was saturated with the scent of leather and sandalwood, the ceiling-high shelves packed tight with hardback books that had likely never been opened. The door clicked softly shut behind Scarlett, and she understood she was alone with the most powerful man she had ever met. Sebastian didn't turn to look at her. He walked to the tall window that overlooked the garden and stopped there, his back to Scarlett, his hands clasped behind him. Silence stretched out. 1 minute, 2. Scarlett understood exactly what this was. She'd seen the tactic before, in bullies at the orphanage, in bosses who wanted to display their power, in people who believed silence could make someone else shake and shrink. But Scarlett wasn't the kind of person who could be intimidated. She stood still, patiently waiting, not shifting, not fidgeting, not showing a trace of unease. At last, Sebastian turned around, his gray eyes locked onto Scarlett's, sharp and cold as a blade. "I don't care about your credentials," he said, his voice low and even. "I don't care about your experience. I don't care which medical school you attended or how many patients you've treated. I care about one thing and one thing only: results." He stepped forward, each footfall solid, deliberate, menacing. 15 doctors have stood exactly where you're standing right now. 15 of the best in the world. They all took my money. They all ran their tests. And they all failed. He stopped directly in front of Scarlett, so close she could see the strained cords of tendon along his neck. "If you waste my time like they did." Sebastian didn't finish the sentence, but the threat hanging in the air was clearer than any words could be. Scarlett didn't retreat so much as a single step. She lifted her chin and held his gaze. "Threatening me won't help your son, Mr. Thornton." Sebastian went still, his jaw tightened, and Scarlett caught the briefest flicker of surprise in his eyes. Clearly he wasn't used to being interrupted, and even less used to being answered by someone in worn scrubs and shoes rubbed down at the heel. But Scarlett didn't stop there. "I'm not here for your money," she continued, her voice calm but unyielding. "I'm not here for your approval or your respect. I'm here because somewhere in this house, there's a child who's been screaming in pain for 2 months, and no one can figure out why. So you can either let me do my job, or I'll walk out that door right now, and you can find someone else to threaten." Silence. Sebastian looked at her, but this time his gaze shifted. The icy menace was gone. In its place was something that resembled curiosity, as if he were seeing a strange creature he had never encountered before. Before he could speak, the study door flew open. Camille came in, her eyes red and swollen from crying. She was still wearing her wrinkled Valentino robe, her blonde hair in disarray, looking nothing like the perfect model she once had been. "Please," Camille said, her voice trembling. She moved toward Scarlett without so much as glancing at her husband. "I heard you're different. I don't know how, and I don't care. Just please save my baby. And then, to Scarlett's shock, Camille dropped to her knees. A former model, with long legs that had once carried her down the most prestigious runways in the world, was now kneeling before a public hospital nurse in shoes worn thin at the heels. Scarlett bent quickly and helped Camille up, her hands closing around the woman's narrow shoulders. "Please, stand up," Scarlett said gently. "I'll do everything I can, I promise, but I need one thing." Sebastian stepped forward, his voice still cold, but threaded now with something else. "Name it." Scarlett looked at him, then at Camille. "Everyone leaves me alone with Ethan. No interference, no cameras, no one standing outside the door watching. Let me observe him without any pressure. Just me and the baby." Sebastian and Camille exchanged a look. A silent conversation passed between them, and finally Sebastian nodded. "You have 1 hour." Scarlett nodded back, then turned and walked out of the study. She didn't see the way Sebastian watched her go, gray eyes full of thought. For the first time in his life, Sebastian Thornton, the man who made the entire underworld tremble, had yielded to a woman he couldn't even buy. Harold led Scarlett to baby Ethan's room on the 2nd floor, then quietly withdrew. The door closed behind her, and the crying slammed into Scarlett's ears at once like a wave. This wasn't the ordinary crying of a child. It was a scream that tore at the heart, raw with pain and desperation, as though someone were torturing a small, defenseless life that had no way to fight back. Scarlett moved quickly to the exquisitely carved Madagascar mahogany crib. Ethan lay there, his skin flushed red as if scalded, his tiny body curled inward, his face twisted with agony. Tears streamed down his cheeks, and his little fingers were clenched into fists, as if he were trying to endure a pain he couldn't explain. On the table near the window, a thick stack of medical records sat waiting, likely more than 300 pages crammed with test results, diagnoses, and notes from 15 of the world's leading doctors. But Scarlett didn't touch the stack. She had seen too many cases where doctors stared at paper and machines and forgot to look at the patient in front of them. She wasn't going to make that mistake. Instead, Scarlett observed, she reached down into the crib and gently touched Ethan. He jolted, and the screaming sharpened, more violent than before. But when Scarlett slowly lifted him up and drew him into her arms, something strange happened. The crying was still there, but it lessened. Not by much, but enough for Scarlett to notice. She set him back into the crib. Immediately the crying doubled, as if acid had just been poured onto his skin. Scarlett lifted him again. The crying eased. She set him down. It surged. She repeated it 3 times, and the result didn't change. Scarlett stood there holding Ethan, her mind working at full speed. The problem wasn't in the baby. The problem was in the crib, or something inside the crib. She settled Ethan onto an armchair nearby, using a pillow to brace him safely. He still cried, but not with the same ferocity as when he was in the crib. Scarlett turned back to the crib and began checking each item, one by one. The Madagascar mahogany, hand-carved by master craftsmen. She ran her fingers over the surface, checked every corner. Normal. Nothing out of place. A Pima silk blanket embroidered with gold thread. She lifted it to her nose, tested the fabric. Soft, no strange odor. Normal. The baby's clothes. High-end organic cotton, washed with the gentlest detergent money could buy. Normal. And then Scarlett stopped. In the corner of the crib, tucked away as if it were trying to hide, lay a small ivory pillow. She picked it up, and instantly she knew something was wrong. The fabric was nothing like the rest of the crib set. It was smoother, glossier, and there was a finely stitched logo in the corner. Elysian Silks. Scarlett had never heard of the brand, but she knew one thing with absolute certainty. This pillow didn't belong here. It didn't match the style of the other items, as if someone had slipped it into the crib without anyone noticing. She brought the pillow closer to Ethan, and his crying spiked immediately. She moved it away, and he eased for a few seconds. Closer, louder, farther, quieter. Her heartbeat quickened. She had found something. A soft knock sounded, and Camille stepped in, her face drawn with worry. "Is everything okay?" I heard him crying less, and Scarlett turned, the pillow in her hand. "Mr. Thornton, where did this pillow come from?" Camille stared at it, her exhausted eyes struggling to focus. She shook her head slowly. "I don't remember. It just appeared one day, about 2 months ago. I thought it was a gift from someone, maybe Victoria, or one of Sebastian's associates. I didn't think much of it. 2 months ago." exactly when Ethan had started crying without end. Scarlett kept her face composed, not letting Camille see what was racing through her mind. I see. Thank you, Mistress Thornton. I need to run a few more observations. Camille nodded and left, too worn down to ask anything else. When the door closed, Scarlett quietly folded the pillow and slipped it into the medical bag she'd brought with her. Someone had put this pillow into Ethan's crib 2 months ago, and since then, the child had been living in hell. She had to find out who had done it, and why. Scarlett stepped into the hallway, making sure the door to baby Ethan's room was sealed shut behind her. She pulled her phone from her pocket, her heart beating fast as she scrolled through her contacts to find a name. Jenny Morrison, an old friend from her nursing school days, now working at a toxicology lab in Manhattan. Scarlett hit call and waited. After 3 rings, Jenny's voice came through. Scarlett, it's been a long time. What's going on? Scarlett lowered her voice, her eyes flicking around to make sure no one could overhear. Jenny, I need a favor. Urgent toxicology test on a fabric sample. Can you do it? A brief pause on the other end, then Jenny answered. For you? Anything. Send it over. I'll have the results in 24 hours. Scarlett let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Thank you. I owe you one. She ended the call and pulled a small zip bag from her medical bag. Carefully, she took out the silk pillow, used her medical scissors to cut a small fabric sample from a corner without the logo, and slipped it into the zip bag. She had just tucked the zip bag into her scrub pocket when a cold voice sounded behind her. What are you doing with that pillow? Scarlett spun around. Victoria Thornton stood there, appearing like a ghost out of nowhere. Her gray eyes narrowed into thin slits of suspicion, her lips pressed into a hard line. Scarlett kept her expression calm, even though her heart was hammering. I'm examining everything that contacts the baby's skin. It's part of my observation process. Victoria advanced, her high heels striking sharply against the marble floor. Give it to me, she said, her voice an order. That pillow is expensive silk, imported from Italy. You have no right to touch it, let alone cut it up. Scarlett didn't move. With all due respect, Mrs. Thornton, I have every right. Your grandson's health is my priority, and I will examine anything that might be causing him harm. Victoria's eyes flashed with anger. She stepped closer, close enough that Scarlett could see the fine wrinkles cleverly concealed beneath layers of expensive makeup. I told you earlier, little girl, Victoria hissed through her teeth. You don't know who you're dealing with. This family has the power to make people disappear, and a little nurse from Brooklyn certainly won't be missed. Scarlett met her gaze without blinking. And I told you, I'm dealing with a sick baby. That's all I care about. Not your money, not your threats, not your power. For a moment, the 2 women faced each other in taut silence. Then Victoria reached out and yanked at the pillow in Scarlett's hands. But Scarlett was ready. She held tight and didn't let go. They struggled for a few seconds, and Scarlett could feel the surprising strength in the older woman's grip. But she didn't give an inch. Victoria clenched the pillow harder, gray eyes burning with fury. And then, suddenly, she released it. The pillow fell back toward Scarlett, and Scarlett caught it quickly, holding it close. But what stopped Scarlett cold wasn't that Victoria had given up. It was the look in her eyes in that instant. Behind the rage and contempt, Scarlett saw something else. Fear. Just for a split second, but it was there, plain as day. You're making a mistake, Victoria said, her voice abruptly turning cold and distant. Then she turned and walked away, her heels clicking faster on the stone floor as if she were fleeing from something. Scarlett stood there, watching Victoria's figure vanish at the far end of the hallway, her mind spinning with 1,000 questions. Why did that woman want this pillow so badly? Why had she been afraid when Scarlett held onto it? Miss Hayes, the low voice made Scarlett turn sharply. Sebastian Thornton stood at the corner of the corridor, his back against the wall, his arms folded across his chest. How long had he been there? Had he seen everything? Scarlett said nothing, waiting. Sebastian stepped closer, his gray eyes never leaving the pillow in her hands. Why does my mother want that pillow so badly? He asked, his voice deep and thoughtful. Scarlett looked him straight in the eye, not flinching. That's exactly what I'm trying to find out, Mr. Thornton. A moment of silence passed. Sebastian's gaze darkened, and Scarlett could almost see the gears turning behind his eyes. For the first time in his life, Sebastian Thornton began to doubt his own mother. After the confrontation with Victoria, Sebastian made a request that caught Scarlett off guard. Stay the night, he said, not in a tone of command but almost like an offer. Ethan needs to be monitored, and I don't trust anyone else in this house right now. Scarlett nodded in agreement. She needed time to wait for the test results from Jenny, and staying would give her the chance to observe more. Harold led her to a guest room on the second floor, not far from baby Ethan's room. It was spacious and luxurious, with a king-size bed dressed in pristine white sheets and landscape paintings hanging on the walls. But no matter how exhausted she was, Scarlett couldn't sleep. She lay there, eyes fixed on the ceiling, her mind churning with 1,000 questions. The pillow, Victoria, the fear in that woman's eyes. What did all these pieces mean? The clock struck 3 o'clock in the morning when Scarlett finally gave up on trying to sleep. She got up, slipped on a thin cardigan a servant had left for her, and quietly stepped out of the room. The mansion at night was so silent it felt unnatural. The statues and paintings lining the corridor looked like mute ghosts, watching her every step. Scarlett made her way downstairs to the kitchen, hoping a glass of water would steady her. The vast kitchen lay in darkness, lit only by moonlight slipping through the tall glass windows, casting silver streaks across the stone floor. Scarlett was about to walk in when she stopped. Someone had been here before her. Sebastian sat at the island in the center of the kitchen, his shoulders slightly hunched, a glass of amber whiskey in his hand. He hadn't turned on a light. He was simply there in the dark, like a lonely statue in the deep night. Scarlett started to turn back quietly, not wanting to disturb him, but Sebastian's voice carried through the shadows. "Can't sleep either?" She paused, hesitated for a second, then walked into the kitchen. "I was just getting some water." Sebastian didn't speak. He only tipped his head toward the chair across from him, a silent invitation. Scarlett poured herself a glass of water at the sink, then sat down, keeping a safe distance between them. For a long time, neither of them spoke. There was only the tick of a clock somewhere in the dark and the soft sound of their breathing. Then Sebastian spoke, his voice low and tired. "You're different from the others." Scarlett looked at him, waiting. Sebastian lifted the whiskey to his mouth, took a sip, then went on. "All those doctors, all those specialists, they looked at me with fear, like I was a monster they had to appease. But you don't. You look at me like—" He didn't finish, but Scarlett understood. "Should I be afraid?" she asked bluntly. Sebastian looked at her, his gray eyes in the darkness deep as the ocean. "Most people are. Most people know better." Scarlett set her glass down and answered in an even voice. "I've been through worse things than a rich man with a bad temper, Mr. Thornton." Her reply surprised him. He tilted his head, studying her with new curiosity. "Worse things?" Scarlett was quiet for a moment. She didn't often speak about her past. Those memories were scars she had tried to hide for years. But something about tonight, about this dark kitchen, about the weary look in the man's eyes across from her, made her loosen her grip. "I grew up in 7 foster homes," she said, her voice barely more than breath. "Some were not kind." She didn't go into detail. She didn't talk about the beatings, the meals withheld, the nights curled up in the corner of a cold room. But Sebastian understood. She could see it in his eyes. Silence stretched between them again, not the awkward kind, but the kind that forms when two strangers unexpectedly find a point of contact. "Is that why you work at a public hospital?" Sebastian asked, his voice softer than before. "Helping people no one else cares about?" Scarlett nodded. "I know what it feels like to suffer and have no one listen, to be invisible, to be forgotten. I don't want anyone else to feel that way, especially not children." Sebastian looked at her, and this time his gaze wasn't cold or threatening. It wasn't pity either, the kind she hated. It was understanding. As if he was seeing her, truly seeing her, for the first time. He stood, set his whiskey glass on the counter. "You're not what I expected, Miss Hayes." Scarlett looked up at him. "Neither are you, Mr. Thornton." He walked toward the doorway, but stopped at the threshold. Without turning back, he said, "Sebastian, call me Sebastian." Scarlett smiled faintly, though he couldn't see it. "Good night, Sebastian." He walked away, his tall figure slowly dissolving into the darkness of the corridor. But before he disappeared completely, he turned and looked at her one more time, just for an instant, but it was enough for Scarlett to realize something had changed. For the first time in years, Sebastian Thornton felt something warm slip into the frozen cage of his chest. The next morning, Scarlett woke early after a night of almost no sleep. She went to baby Ethan's room as soon as the sun began to rise, checking on him. With the silk pillow gone from the crib, he had slept for a few hours, and the crying had decreased significantly. His skin was still flushed, but he was no longer twisting in pain the way he had before. It was the clearest proof that Scarlett was heading in the right direction. She was gently examining his skin when the phone in her pocket vibrated. Scarlett glanced at the screen, and her heart began to beat faster when she saw Jenny's name. She quickly stepped into the hallway and answered. "Jenny? You have the results?" Jenny's voice on the other end sounded unusually serious. "Scarlett, you need to sit down for this." Scarlett felt a chill run straight down her spine. "Just tell me." Jenny took a deep breath, then said, "That fabric sample you sent me? It's laced with a slow-acting dermal irritant, industrial grade, the kind that's designed to cause chronic skin inflammation and pain over extended exposure. It's not something you can buy at a store. Whoever got this knew exactly what they were doing." Scarlett stood perfectly still, the phone pressed tight to her ear. "Someone poisoned the baby?" "Not to kill," Jenny confirmed, her voice thick with disgust. "To make him suffer. Slowly, painfully, over months. If the baby kept being exposed to this, it could have caused permanent nerve damage. Whoever did this wanted maximum suffering with minimum evidence." Nausea rose in Scarlett's throat. Someone had deliberately tortured a 10-month-old baby, an innocent life that couldn't protect itself. "Thank you, Jenny. I owe you more than you know." She ended the call and stood there for a moment, trying to rein in the fury boiling inside her. Then she turned and ran to find Sebastian. The Thornton mansion was a massive labyrinth, and in her haste, Scarlett took a wrong turn, wandering into a part of the house she had never seen. The corridor here was darker, stripped of paintings and decorative statues. The air felt heavy, menacing. She was about to turn back when she heard voices spilling out from behind a heavy oak door. Sebastian's voice, but unlike anything she had heard from him before. Colder, more threatening, more lethal. Instinct told her to leave, but curiosity won. Scarlett moved closer to the door and peered through a narrow crack. The room inside looked like an office, but the atmosphere felt more like a torture chamber. Sebastian stood there, spine straight as a sword, his face made of ice. In front of him, a middle-aged man knelt on the floor, pale with terror, blood running from a cut on his forehead. Two large men in black suits stood on either side, clearly Sebastian's security, or his enforcers. "I asked you a simple question," Sebastian said, his voice so low and steady it was chilling. "Where is my shipment?" Scarlett understood immediately. Sebastian wasn't just a wealthy businessman. He was something far darker. The rumors she had heard in passing about the Thornton family's underworld empire suddenly became as clear as daylight. She was about to step back when a firm hand clamped onto her shoulder. Maxwell, Sebastian's assistant, stood there with a cold expression. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice low and threatening. "This area is off limits." Scarlett didn't flinch. She had seen too many frightening things in her life to be intimidated by a man in a suit. "I don't care what he is," she said bluntly. "His son is being poisoned. I have proof. Let me through." Maxwell frowned, clearly not used to being spoken to like that. But the word poisoned made him pause. He looked at her for a moment, then nodded and opened the door. Sebastian turned at the sound of it, surprise flashing briefly across his face when he saw Scarlett step in. He signaled his men to take the kneeling man away, and the room quickly emptied until only the two of them remained. "Miss Hayes," Sebastian said, his voice still carrying the chill of the interrogation that had just taken place. "You shouldn't be here." "The pillow," Scarlett said, ignoring the warning. "It's laced with a chemical irritant. Industrial grade. Someone has been poisoning Ethan for 2 months." Sebastian froze. For a moment he simply stood there, as if his mind needed time to process what she had just said. Then the storm hit. Sebastian turned and slammed his fist down onto the nearest wooden table with terrifying force. The tabletop split apart, wood splintering everywhere. "Who?" he roared, his voice like thunder. "Who dared to touch my son?" The rage of a mafia king was a frightening thing. His eyes burned, veins rose along his neck, and the whole room seemed to tremble under the weight of his fury. But Scarlett didn't step back. She stood her ground, calm, waiting for the storm to pass. When Sebastian finally wrestled back a shred of control, he turned toward her, breathing hard. "Who sent that pillow?" "I don't know yet," Scarlett said, "but we can find out. Check the delivery records." Sebastian pulled out his phone and made a short call. Minutes later, Harold appeared in the doorway, his face drained pale when he saw the shattered table. "Sir, you called?" "The silk pillow in Ethan's room," Sebastian said, his voice dangerous as a blade held to a throat. Find out where it came from. Now." Harold nodded and vanished. 10 minutes later, he returned holding an iPad, his hands trembling. "Sir, I found the order. The pillow was purchased from Elysian Silks 2 months ago." "And?" Sebastian stepped closer, eyes narrowing. "Who ordered it?" Harold swallowed, his face white as if he might faint. "The account used was Mrs. Victoria Thornton's, sir." A dead silence sealed the room. Scarlett looked at Sebastian and saw his face lock into an expressionless mask. But in his gray eyes, a storm was forming. A storm even more terrifying than the fury that had just erupted. He stood there like stone, staring into the distance, toward the part of the house where his mother was. "Leave us," he said, his voice colder than ice. "All of you. Now." Harold hurried away. Maxwell, who had appeared at the door, stepped back as well. Only Scarlett remained, unsure whether she should go or stay. Sebastian turned to her, and for an instant she didn't see the frightening Mafia king at all, but a man who had just been betrayed by his own mother. "Thank you, Miss Hayes," he said, his voice low and exhausted. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to have a conversation with my mother." Sebastian walked out of the room, with steps that landed like boulders. He pulled out his phone and called Maxwell, his voice cold as steel. "Lock down the estate. No one gets in or out. I mean no one. Post guards at every exit. If my mother tries to leave, stop her." He ended the call and stood there for a moment, his back to Scarlett, his shoulders drawn tight like a string about to snap. Scarlett could feel the storm coiling inside him, a deep fury braided with the pain of betrayal. Rapid footsteps sounded in the hallway, and Camille appeared, her face pale as someone who had just seen a ghost. She was still in her silk nightgown, her blonde hair a tangled mess, clearly having heard the news from someone in the house. "Sebastian," she called, her voice shaking. "What's happening? They said someone poisoned Ethan? Tell me it's not true. Please tell me it's not true." Sebastian didn't turn. He didn't answer. He only stood there, eyes fixed distantly through the window, as if he were somewhere very far away. Camille turned to Scarlett, eyes red and drowning in desperation. "Is it true? Who would do this to a baby? To our baby?" Scarlett drew a deep breath. She didn't want to be the one to say it. But Camille deserved the truth. "The evidence points to the pillow in Ethan's crib," she said, forcing her voice to stay steady. "It was laced with a chemical irritant, and the pillow was ordered from your mother-in-law's account." Camille went rigid, as if she'd been struck across the face. "Victoria?" she whispered, horror cracking through her voice. "No, that's impossible. She's his grandmother. She held him when he was born. She bought him that silver rattle from Tiffany's. She wouldn't." "Is it, Camille?" Sebastian finally spoke, his voice low and exhausted. He turned, and Scarlett saw a deep ache in his gray eyes. "Is it really impossible? Think about it. Think about how she's always been. The control, the manipulation, the way she looks at Ethan like he's an obstacle rather than a grandchild." Camille shook her head, refusing to believe what she was hearing. But why? Why would she hurt her own grandson? What could she possibly gain from making a baby suffer? Sebastian was silent for a moment. Then he said, his voice like he was reading out a death sentence, "Ethan is the sole heir to a $200 million trust fund. My father set it up before he died. The money will be Ethan's when he turns 21. But if he's declared mentally or physically unfit before that," Scarlett understood immediately, "the guardianship transfers to the next person in line." Sebastian nodded. "And that person is my mother." Camille collapsed into the nearest chair, her legs no longer able to hold her. "She was willing to destroy her own grandson, her own flesh and blood for money?" she whispered, her voice breaking into pieces. Sebastian looked at his wife, and for an instant Scarlett saw a rare softness move across his cold face. "You don't know my mother, Camille. You never did. She's not the elegant grandmother you see at dinner parties. She's a predator, and I should have seen this coming years ago." He turned and walked toward the door, his steps steady, filled with purpose. Camille lifted her head, tears sliding down her cheeks. "What are you going to do?" Sebastian stopped at the threshold, still with his back to them. "What I should have done years ago." "Sebastian," Scarlett said, stepping forward once. She didn't know why she cared, why she felt worried for this man, but something inside her pushed her to speak. "Don't do anything you'll regret." Sebastian turned and looked at her, and for a moment the hardness on his face fell away. He looked at her with an expression Scarlett had never seen in him before, almost gentle. "Stay with Ethan," he said, his voice quieter now. "Keep him safe. I'll handle this." Then he turned and walked away, his tall figure fading toward the end of the hallway. Scarlett stood there watching him go, unease rising in her chest. She didn't know what Sebastian would do when he confronted his mother, the woman who had tried to poison her own grandson. But she knew one thing for certain: the storm was about to break, and no one in this house would ever be the same after tonight. Sebastian walked the corridor toward the east wing of the mansion, the place his mother occupied with a suite of private rooms, like a queen ruling her own kingdom. The silk pillow lay in his hand, weightless to the touch, yet heavy as an indictment. Each step carried him closer to a truth he had deliberately ignored for so many years. He stopped before an oak door carved with intricate patterns, drew a deep breath, and pushed it open without knocking. The room glowed with the gentle light of crystal chandeliers. Victoria sat in a red velvet armchair by the window, her back to the door, a glass of red wine in her hand as dark as blood. She didn't turn when she heard the door open, as if she'd known all along who would come. "I wondered when you'd come," she said, so calmly it turned the air cold, as though they were about to discuss the weather and not the poisoning of an infant. "Did that little nurse finally figure it out?" Sebastian said nothing. He walked forward and set the silk pillow on the table in front of Victoria with a dull, hard thud. "Explain this." Victoria finally turned. Her gray eyes, the very same gray as Sebastian's, dropped to the pillow and then rose to her son. A cold smile bloomed on her lips. "That little nurse of yours is clever," she said, taking a sip of wine. "I'll give her that. I didn't expect anyone to trace it back so quickly. Those 15 doctors certainly didn't." Sebastian felt his blood boil. "You're not denying it?" Victoria stood, setting her glass down with a grace polished by decades. She stepped closer, facing her son, not a flicker of fear or regret in her gaze. "Why would I deny it?" she asked, her voice steeped in contempt. "The plan was perfect. A slow-acting irritant, undetectable by standard medical tests, no permanent damage if caught in time, just enough to make the child appear unfit, unstable, incapable of inheriting." It felt to Sebastian like a fist had slammed into his chest. "He's your grandson, Mother. Your own flesh and blood. He's just a baby." Victoria flicked her hand as if swatting away an annoying fly. "He's weak," she spat, each word like poison. "Just like his mother. Just like you before I hardened you. Do you think the Thornton Empire was built by weak men? Do you think your father's legacy can be protected by a crying baby who can't even sleep through the night?" Sebastian staggered back a step, as if he'd been slapped. "What are you talking about? What do you mean, before you hardened me?" Victoria laughed, a cold sound that echoed through the room. "You were soft when you were young, Sebastian. Too soft. Too kind. You reminded me of your father, and I couldn't let that happen. I had to make you strong. I had to break you down and rebuild you into someone worthy of the Thornton name." She looked at her son with the eyes of an artist studying her own work. "The Thornton Empire needs a strong leader. I built this family into what it is today. I deserve to control its future, not some infant who hasn't earned anything." "Father built this empire," Sebastian said, his voice trembling with restraint. "You just spent it. You just manipulated and destroyed everything he worked for." Victoria's eyes darkened, and her smile sharpened into a curl of scorn. "Your father?" she sneered. "That weak, pathetic man who wanted to go legitimate? Who wanted to abandon everything I sacrificed for? Who wanted to turn the Thornton Empire into some boring legal corporation?" A chill slid down Sebastian's spine. There was something in his mother's voice, a bitterness so deep he'd never truly heard it before. "What did you do?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. Victoria tilted her head, watching him as if deciding whether he was worthy of the truth. "I did what was necessary," she said, each word clear, and not a trace of remorse anywhere in it. "Just like I always do. Just like I'm doing now." Sebastian's eyes widened as the final pieces fell into place. The car accident 20 years ago. His father dead on the road to a meeting about restructuring the company. The brakes failing. No witnesses. The case closed as an accident. "The car accident," he whispered, his voice splintering. 20 years ago. It wasn't an accident, was it? Victoria didn't answer with words. She simply stood there, that cold smile saying everything. Her silence was the clearest confession of all. "You killed my father," Sebastian said, and it wasn't a question. It was a sentence. Victoria shrugged, not the slightest tremor of feeling crossing her face. "I saved this family," she said, her voice sharp as a knife. "Your father would have destroyed everything. He was weak. He had morals. Morals have no place in our world, Sebastian. And I'll do it again if I have to. Anyone who threatens the Thornton legacy will be eliminated, including that crying brat you call a son. Sebastian backed away, as if the ground beneath his feet were caving in. His mother wasn't only the one who'd poisoned her own grandson, she was the one who'd killed her husband. She was the monster that had been hiding inside his family for years. "I'm calling the police," he said, his voice shaking but resolute. Victoria burst into laughter, sharp and cold, ricocheting off the walls. "The police? You? A mafia boss calling the police? Don't make me laugh, Sebastian. You think they'll help you? You think they'll believe you? We own half the police force in this state." Sebastian pulled out his phone, his eyes never leaving his mother. "For the first time in my life, I'll let the law handle it, because if I do it myself, Mother." He stopped, and when he spoke again, his voice was colder than anything Victoria had ever heard. "There won't be anything left of you." He dialed and raised the phone to his ear, and for the first time in Sebastian's entire life, he saw something on his mother's face that he'd never believed he would see. Fear. The fear on Victoria's face lasted only an instant before she regained her composure and changed tactics. The cold arrogance melted away, replaced by a softened expression Sebastian had never seen on his mother, or at least had never seen sincerely. She stepped forward, her hands reaching as if to take her son's. "Sebastian, please," she said, her voice suddenly trembling and thick with feeling. "I'm your mother. I carried you for 9 months. I raised you. Everything I did, everything, was for this family. For you. Can't you see that? I was trying to protect our legacy." Sebastian stepped back, recoiling from her hands the way one recoils from a venomous snake. "You poisoned my son," he said, each word striking like a hammer against stone. "You killed my father, the man who gave me life, the man who loved me unconditionally." He looked straight into her eyes, and his voice was colder than any winter. "You are not my mother. My mother died the moment she decided to hurt my child." The mask of weakness slipped, and Victoria's true face showed through. Panic flashed in her eyes as she realized that this time she couldn't manipulate her son. She spun and ran for the door, her high heels clattering on the stone floor. But before she could reach the handle, a tall figure blocked her path. Maxwell stood there, his face ice cold, arms folded across his chest. "I don't think so, Mrs. Thornton," he said, his voice flat. Victoria turned back toward Sebastian, her eyes now wild with desperate frenzy. "You can't do this to me," she screamed. "I'll tell them everything. About your business. About the bodies buried under the warehouse. About the shipments. About every dirty deal you've ever made. I'll destroy you, Sebastian." Sebastian stood there, calm as water without a ripple. "Do it," he said evenly. "Tell them everything. I don't care anymore. Nothing you can say will be worse than what you've done." From far away, the wail of police sirens began. At first a small, distant sound, then closer, sharper, unmistakable. Victoria heard it and her face drained white. Through the window, Scarlett, standing in the hallway, could see the surreal scene unfolding outside. 2 police patrol cars with spinning red and blue lights were parked right beside a gleaming Rolls-Royce Phantom and a black Bentley. The contrast between the law and wealth was as stark as a satirical painting. The front door opened, and Detective Marcus Webb stepped inside, followed by 2 uniformed officers. Webb was a middle-aged man, with salt and pepper hair and sharp eyes that had seen far too much in his life. He wasn't impressed by the luxury around him, and he wasn't intimidated by the Thornton name. He was simply doing his job. "Mrs. Victoria Thornton," Webb said, his voice professional and cold. "You're under arrest for attempted murder of a minor and suspicion of involvement in the death of Richard Thornton 20 years ago. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law," Victoria screamed as the 2 officers moved in on her. "No, you can't do this. Do you know who I am? I am Victoria Thornton. I built this empire. I own half the judges in this state." But her words did nothing. The cold steel handcuffs snapped shut around her wrists with a crisp click. That sound rang like a death knell for the reign of the Thornton Queen. "You're making a mistake," Victoria shrieked as she was dragged through the hallway. "All of you. That child will never be strong. The Thornton blood is dying. You need me. Without me, this family is nothing." The servants stood along the corridor in stunned silence, watching the woman who had ruled them with fear, now hauled away like an ordinary criminal. Harold, the old butler, stood there with a blank face, but Scarlett could see something in his eyes, perhaps relief. Victoria struggled, twisting her head back to look at Sebastian one last time as she was taken to the door. "You'll regret this," she screamed, her voice cracking with rage and desperation. "Without me, you're nothing, Sebastian. Nothing. I made you, I created you, and I can destroy you." Sebastian stood as still as stone, his face empty of expression. He said nothing, did nothing, only watched as his mother was taken away. The police car door slammed shut. Red and blue lights flashed in the fading daylight, and the car rolled forward, carrying away the woman who had once been queen of the Thornton Empire. Silence settled over the mansion like a heavy blanket. Sebastian remained where he was, staring as the car disappeared beyond the iron gates. Maxwell stepped up beside him, his voice unusually gentle. "Sir, are you okay?" Sebastian didn't answer, but Scarlett, standing a few steps away, noticed what perhaps no one else did. Sebastian's hand was shaking. Not much, just slightly, but enough for her to know that beneath the cold shell, he was breaking apart. Then he turned, and his gray eyes searched through the crowd until they found Scarlett. For a moment they only looked at each other, and Scarlett saw in his eyes not anger or pain, but a deep, consuming worry. "Ethan," he said, his voice gone rough. "Is he safe?" While Sebastian confronted his mother and the police arrived to arrest Victoria, Scarlett stayed beside baby Ethan. She knew the most important task right now wasn't to witness the fall of the Thornton Queen, but to care for the small, innocent victim of all that ambition and cruelty. She had asked Harold to bring a basin of warm water, several clean soft cloths, and a skin-soothing medicine from the family's medicine cabinet. With the gentleness of someone who had spent her entire life tending to the weakest lives, Scarlett began her work. She undressed Ethan, examining every patch of reddened, swollen skin. 2 months of exposure to the poison had left its mark on his delicate body, but thankfully, there was no permanent damage. She dipped the cloth into the warm water and began washing each part of him, removing any chemical residue that might still be clinging to his skin. Ethan still cried, but the crying was much weaker now, as if he was simply too exhausted after 2 months of unrelenting pain. Scarlett whispered soft words of comfort as she worked, even though she knew he couldn't understand. But perhaps he could feel the tenderness in her voice, the warmth in her hands. After she finished cleansing him, she applied a thin layer of the soothing medicine to the irritated areas, her touch light as if she were brushing the petals of a flower. And then, something miraculous happened. For the first time in 2 months, Ethan stopped crying, not because he was exhausted, not because of a sedative, but because the pain had finally stopped. He lay there with wide, clear blue eyes, looking up at Scarlett with the innocent curiosity of a 10-month-old child. The painful grimace was gone from his tiny face. The tears were gone. There was only calm. Then he smiled. A small smile, no more than a gentle curve at the corner of his mouth. But it was the first smile in 8 weeks. The first smile since that vicious pillow had appeared in his crib. Scarlett felt tears spill over. She didn't know when she had started crying, only that the tears were sliding down her cheeks, dropping onto her hands, mingling with the warm skin of baby Ethan. She lifted him carefully and held him to her chest, feeling his soft breath against her throat. Ethan curled into her arms, tiny fingers clutching at her clothes, and for the first time he seemed truly safe. Rushed footsteps sounded in the hallway, and Camille burst into the room, her face drained with worry. "Is he?" she began, her voice thick with emotion. Then she stopped. She saw Ethan lying quietly in Scarlett's arms, not crying, not twisting in pain, and he was smiling. "Oh my God," Camille whispered, one hand flying to cover her mouth. "He's okay?" Scarlett nodded, tears still streaming. "He's okay. He's finally okay." Camille rushed forward and wrapped both Scarlett and Ethan into her arms. She didn't speak. She only trembled with relief, with gratitude, with all the emotions she had held back for 2 months now spilling free. The 3 of them stood there, holding one another in silence, and the room that had once echoed with screams of pain now held only soft breathing and the sound of happy tears. A figure appeared in the doorway. Sebastian stood there, his back against the frame, eyes fixed on the scene before him. The exhaustion and hurt of confronting his mother still clung to him, but when he saw his son drifting to sleep in Scarlett's arms, his face softened. Ethan had fallen asleep, the first sleep without tears, without pain, without that heart-tearing scream. Only the peace of a child finally released from hell. Sebastian stepped closer, looked down at his son's tranquil face, then raised his eyes to Scarlett. He didn't speak. He only nodded once, slowly, with a meaning that needed no words. But in his gray eyes, Scarlett saw something she had never seen there before. Gratitude. Deep and real. And maybe, just maybe, something more than that. 2 days had passed since Victoria was arrested. The Thornton mansion was strangely quiet now, no longer filled with Ethan's heart-ripping screams, no longer weighted down by the suffocating tension that had pressed on everyone. Ethan had recovered quickly. His skin no longer flushed red, and he had begun to eat and sleep normally, like any other 10-month-old baby. Scarlett had stayed to monitor him, to make sure every trace of the poison had vanished completely. But now her work was done. It was time to return to her real life, to the public hospital in Brooklyn, to the small, cold apartment, to the endless night shifts. That morning, Harold knocked on her door and told her Sebastian wanted to see her in the study. Scarlett changed into the only clean set of scrubs left in her bag and followed the old butler. When she stepped into the study, Sebastian was standing in front of an open safe, his back to her. She could see stacks of cash inside, important documents, and other things she didn't want to know about. He stood there for a moment in silence, then finally turned around. In his hand was a checkbook, and when he walked over and set it on the desk in front of Scarlett, she saw the number written on it, $10 million. Scarlett stared at the figure, feeling as if someone had punched her in the chest. $10 million. Enough for her to buy a home, to open a clinic of her own, to help thousands of poor patients without ever having to worry about money again. Enough to change her life forever. "You saved my son," Sebastian said, his voice low and serious. "You exposed my mother. You gave me back my family, or what's left of it. This is the least I can do." Scarlett didn't reach for the checkbook. She only stood there, looking down at the numbers, silent. Sebastian frowned. "Is it not enough? I can double it. 20 million. Name your price." "It's not about the amount," Scarlett said, her voice soft but firm. Sebastian stepped closer, confusion plain on the face that was usually carved from ice. "Then what? What do you want? A house? A car? A position at any hospital you choose? I can make it happen. Anything." Scarlett lifted her head and looked straight into his gray eyes. "You paid 15 doctors millions of dollars," she said, each word clear and slow. "The best in the world," you said. "They came here with their fancy degrees and their expensive equipment. They looked at machines. They looked at test results. They looked at genetic markers and brain scans and blood samples." She paused, drawing a deep breath. "But they didn't look at the child. They didn't sit down and observe him. They didn't ask simple questions like, where did this pillow come from? They didn't notice something that didn't belong." Sebastian stood still, saying nothing, but Scarlett could see he was listening, truly listening. "They saw your money," she continued. "They saw your power. And they gave you what they thought you wanted to hear. They ran tests that cost hundreds of thousands of dollars because that's what rich people expect. But they missed the obvious, because the obvious doesn't come with a price tag." Silence filled the study. Sebastian looked at her, and in his eyes Scarlett saw something shift, as if he were seeing her in an entirely new light. "I don't want to become one of them," Scarlett said, her voice easing. "Someone who sees money instead of people. Someone who forgets why they became a healer in the first place." Sebastian set the checkbook down, looking at her with something close to helplessness. "Then what do you want?" Scarlett rose and gave him a small smile. "I want to go home knowing Ethan will be okay, that he'll grow up healthy and happy, surrounded by people who truly love him." She glanced toward the window, where the morning sunlight was spilling across the green garden. "That's enough for me. That's more than enough." She turned and walked toward the door, leaving the $10 million checkbook lying on the desk without a trace of regret. "Miss Hayes." Sebastian's voice came behind her, and she stopped. "Scarlett." She didn't turn around. She only stood there, her hand on the doorknob. "Thank you," he said, and his voice was different now, softer, more honest than anything she had heard from him before. "For everything." Scarlett smiled, though he couldn't see it. "Take care of him, Sebastian. Take care of Ethan. That's all the thanks I need." She opened the door and stepped out, not looking back. Behind her, Sebastian stood alone in the study, watching the small figure of her disappear beyond the door. And in that moment, he realized something he had never thought he would feel. He didn't want her to leave. Scarlett drove her beat-up 2008 Honda Civic away from the Thornton estate that afternoon. In the rearview mirror, she watched the enormous iron gates swing shut behind her, and the mansion shrank until it was nothing but a small dot, then vanished completely. She drove along familiar roads, leaving the polished luxury of the Hamptons behind and returning to Brooklyn, where old buildings and narrow streets welcomed her like an old friend. Her studio apartment sat on the 4th floor of a red brick building built in the 1960s. The elevator broken long ago, and no one bothering to fix it. She climbed 4 flights of stairs, opened the door, and stood there in the cold darkness. The apartment was bare, holding only a narrow bed, a small table, and an old refrigerator humming in the corner of the kitchenette. After the days in the Thornton mansion with its soaring ceilings and marble floors, this place felt smaller than ever. But this was her home, the place she belonged. She told herself that as she turned on the light and began to tidy up. A week passed. Scarlett went back to the public hospital, back to the endless night shifts, back to poor patients with no insurance, back to solitary meals in the hospital cafeteria under harsh neon lights. Everything was the same, and yet something had changed. She worked the way she always had, cared for patients the way she always had, but her mind was always somewhere far away. Her co-workers began to notice. "You okay, Scarlett?" Maria, the night shift charge nurse, asked when she caught Scarlett staring out the window instead of finishing patient charts. "You seem distracted lately." Scarlett startled and forced a smile. "I'm fine, just tired." But she wasn't fine. Every night, lying alone on the narrow bed in her cold apartment, she thought about Sebastian's gray eyes, his low voice, the way he had looked at her when she refused the $10 million checkbook. She thought about that conversation in the kitchen at 3 o'clock in the morning, about the way he listened when she spoke about her past, about the understanding in his gaze with not a trace of pity. She told herself she was being foolish, that Sebastian Thornton belonged to a world completely separate from hers, that nothing could ever happen between them. But her heart refused to listen to reason. In the Hamptons, in the Thornton mansion, Sebastian was going through the same thing. He sat in his study with stacks of business papers in front of him, contracts waiting to be signed, decisions that needed to be made, but he couldn't focus. His eyes kept drifting to the window, to the road where that beat-up Honda Civic had disappeared a week earlier. Maxwell walked in, set a cup of coffee on the desk, and noticed his boss staring into nothing. "Sir, you've been staring at that report for an hour," Maxwell said, keeping his voice neutral, "and you haven't signed a single document all morning." Sebastian looked at him, irritation flickering across his face. "Mind your business, Maxwell." Maxwell was quiet for a moment, then spoke more gently. "With all due respect, sir, you're thinking about her, aren't you? The nurse?" Sebastian didn't answer. He turned his face away and looked out the window again. But his silence was the clearest answer of all. Maxwell nodded and quietly left the room, leaving Sebastian alone with his thoughts. That night, after everyone in the mansion had gone to sleep, Sebastian drove the Bentley out of the garage. He didn't tell anyone where he was going. He didn't bring security. He didn't inform Maxwell. He just drove through the dark, heading for Brooklyn. Rain began to fall when he arrived. Not heavy rain, only fine droplets that coated the windshield like a gauzy veil. Sebastian parked on the street across from the old red brick building where Scarlett lived. He stepped out of the car and stood in the rain, tilting his head up to look. 4th floor. The 3rd window from the left. A faint light glowed through the thin curtain, telling him she was still awake. He stood there, rain soaking his expensive suit, his hair plastered to his forehead, and he didn't care. He only stood there looking up at that small apartment and feeling something he had never felt in all his life. Sebastian Thornton, the most powerful mafia boss in New York, the man who made the entire underworld tremble, was standing in the rain outside a cheap building in Brooklyn, staring up at the window of a public hospital nurse. And in that moment, he admitted the truth he had tried to deny for the entire week. He was in love. 6 o'clock in the morning, when the Brooklyn sky was still a dull gray and the streetlights were beginning to blink out one by one, Scarlett stepped out through the hospital gates after a long 12-hour night shift. Her eyes were half closed with exhaustion, her shoulders heavy, and all she wanted was to go home, take a hot shower, and sleep for a long time. She was dragging herself toward the bus stop when she stopped short. A gleaming black Bentley was parked right in front of the hospital entrance, standing out among battered cars and yellow cabs like a diamond in a pile of gravel. And leaning against that car, in a perfect black suit as if he had just walked out of a board meeting instead of staying awake all night, was Sebastian Thornton. Scarlett stood there, her heart beating faster, not sure what she was feeling. Relief, confusion, fear. Maybe all of it at once. She walked up and stopped a few steps away. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice tired but unable to hide her surprise. Sebastian looked at her, and Scarlett realized he looked tired too, as if he hadn't slept in days. "I've been asking myself the same question," he said, his voice low and rougher than usual. "I stood outside your building last night in the rain for 2 hours, trying to figure out what I was doing there, and I still don't have a good answer." Scarlett felt her heart tighten. He had stood in the rain because of her. "You shouldn't be here," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. I'm not part of your world, Sebastian. I'm just a nurse. I live in a tiny apartment. I take the bus to work. I eat instant noodles for dinner." She glanced down at her worn-heeled shoes. "We're from different planets." Sebastian stepped closer, and Scarlett could smell expensive cologne, threaded with the scent of last night's rain. "I know," he said, his voice softening. "I know we're different. I know I have no right to be here, but I can't be anywhere else. I've tried. Believe me, I've tried. But every time I close my eyes, I see your face. Every time I try to focus on work, I hear your voice." He stopped and drew a deep breath. "I don't know what you've done to me, Scarlett Hayes, but I can't get you out of my head." Silence settled between them. A light rain began to fall, fine droplets landing in Scarlett's hair like tiny pearls. Sebastian looked at her, gray eyes holding something she had never seen in him before. "Vulnerability. Have coffee with me," he said. "Please, just 1 cup. That's all I'm asking." Scarlett looked at him, at the gleaming Bentley, at the expensive suit. Then she looked into his eyes and saw not a powerful mafia boss, but a man asking for a chance. "Fine," she said, "but not in your fancy car. There's a coffee shop around the corner. They serve terrible coffee in paper cups. Think you can handle that?" Sebastian smiled, a small smile, but real. "I'll survive." They walked to the little coffee shop on the corner, a modest place with plastic chairs and worn formica tables. Sebastian Thornton, a mafia boss with $1 billion fortune, sat on a cheap plastic chair with a paper cup of coffee in his hand, looking completely out of place, and yet completely unconcerned. "You're the first person who looked at me and didn't see a monster," he said, eyes on the coffee. "Everyone else, they either fear me or want something from me. But you just saw me, the real me, and you didn't run." Scarlett took a sip, tasting the familiar bitterness on her tongue. "You're not a monster, Sebastian. You're a man who made choices, some good, some bad, just like everyone else." Sebastian lifted his head and looked at her as if she had said something extraordinary. "I want to make better choices," he said, his voice serious. "You make me want to be someone else, someone better, someone worthy of—" He stopped, unable to finish. Scarlett looked down, turning the paper cup slowly in her hands. "I've been hurt before, Sebastian, too many times, by people I trusted, by people I thought cared about me." She drew a slow breath. "I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I can let myself." Sebastian set his hand on the table near hers, not touching. "I'm not asking you to love me," he said gently. "I'm not asking you to trust me. Not yet. I know I haven't earned that." He met her eyes. "I'm just asking for a chance. One chance to prove that I can be more than what I've been. One chance to show you that my feelings are real." Scarlett looked into his gray eyes, searching for any sign of deception, any trace of manipulation she had seen in too many people in her life. But she found nothing but honesty, vulnerability, and a fragile hope. She stayed silent for a long time, her heart wrestling with her mind. Then, at last, she said, "1 chance. That's all you get. If you mess this up, I'm gone. No second chances. No explanations. I walk away and you never find me again." Sebastian smiled, and it was the first true smile Scarlett had ever seen on his face. Not the cold smile of a mafia boss, not the polished smile of a businessman, but the smile of a man who had just been handed the most precious gift of his life. 1 chance is all I need. 3 months passed like a dream. Scarlett still worked at the public hospital in Brooklyn, still took the long night shifts, still cared for poor patients with no insurance. But something had changed. A free clinic had opened on the corner near her apartment, fully equipped with modern medical technology and staffed by a team of volunteers. The sign outside read Hayes Community Clinic in blue letters on a white background. When Scarlett asked about the anonymous sponsor who had paid for everything, from the rent to the medical equipment, no one could give her an answer. But she knew. She knew exactly who was behind it all, even though she never said it out loud and he never admitted it. Scarlett and Sebastian dated in a slow, sincere way. There were no lavish trips on private jets, no dinners in five-star restaurants that had to be booked months in advance. Instead, Sebastian learned how to live like an ordinary man. He went out for pho at the little corner place Scarlett loved, sat on a cramped plastic chair, and slurped the broth with awkward determination. He watched movies in her tiny studio apartment, perched on her worn sofa with a carton of popcorn from the grocery store. He even tried cooking for her once, and it ended with a scorched pile of spaghetti and a pizza delivered as a rescue plan. Scarlett learned, too. She learned to accept that not all wealth was corrupt, that not everyone with power was cruel. She learned to let Sebastian care for her in his own way, even when that way was sometimes more than necessary. She learned to trust, bit by bit, a man who had once made the entire underworld tremble, yet could be strangely gentle when he was with her. Ethan was now 13 months old, a healthy little boy with chubby cheeks and a bright, sunny smile. There was no trace left of the months of pain, no more flushed skin, no more heart-tearing screams. He toddled all over the mansion on tiny legs, and every time he saw Scarlett, he would shout "Scar, Scar," and rush toward her with his arms wide open. Scarlett always bent down to catch him, gathered him against her, and kissed his soft hair, feeling the warmth of the small life she had saved. Camille and Sebastian had completed their divorce quietly and amicably. Their marriage had been an arrangement, an alliance between two powerful families. Without real love, Camille held no resentment, no bitterness. The day she signed the divorce papers, she told Sebastian with a relieved smile, "We were never happy, Sebastian." "Not really. We were just two people playing the roles we were assigned. I'm glad you found someone who makes you smile, someone who makes you human." She was still Ethan's mother, still visited him often, and kept a good relationship with both Sebastian and Scarlett. One day, while Scarlett was playing with Ethan in the garden, Camille came to her side and said softly, "Thank you for saving my son." She paused, looking up toward the balcony where Sebastian stood, his eyes following Scarlett with a gentle gaze. "And for saving him." Sebastian gradually withdrew from the illegal activities of the Thornton Empire, shifting into legitimate business. The process wasn't easy, and it wasn't quick, but he was determined to change. For Ethan, for Scarlett, for himself. Victoria was sentenced to 15 years in prison for deliberately harming a child and for involvement in the death of her husband 20 years earlier. The news of the case shocked New York's upper circles, but Sebastian didn't care. She wasn't his mother anymore. She was only a ghost from the past he had left behind. One autumn afternoon, Sebastian took Scarlett to a quiet cemetery on the outskirts of the city. They stood before a black granite grave, the name Richard Thornton engraved in gold. Sebastian laid a bouquet of white roses down, then stood there in silence for a long time. "I wanted you to meet him," he said, his voice low and full of feeling. "My father. He would have liked you." Scarlett looked at the grave, then at Sebastian. "Why?" Sebastian turned to her, and in his gray eyes Scarlett saw a peace she had never seen there before. "Because you're the only person who ever told me the truth. The truth about my mother, the truth about myself, the truth about what really matters in life." He took her hand and squeezed gently. He spent his whole life surrounded by liars. "I think he would have been grateful to know someone like you." 6 months after their first meeting at the Thornton mansion, Sebastian brought Scarlett back to where it had all begun. The black Bentley glided through the familiar iron gates, but this time, they no longer felt like dragons standing guard. The gates opened as if in welcome, and when the mansion came into view, Scarlett realized just how much the place had changed. The heavy curtains had been replaced with airy sheer drapes, letting sunlight pour into every corner. The somber paintings had been taken down, replaced by family photographs and bright landscape art. The air was no longer cold and suffocating, but warm and full of life. And most importantly, there was children's laughter echoing everywhere. The front door opened, and a tiny life shot out like a bullet. Ethan, now 16 months old, toddled forward on plump little legs, brown hair bouncing in the breeze, blue eyes sparkling with joy. "Scar, Scar!" he shouted, his small arms thrown wide. Scarlett bent down and caught him, lifted him up, and spun in a circle. Ethan's giggles rang out into the afternoon air, blending with Scarlett's laughter, becoming the sweetest music this mansion had ever heard. Sebastian stood beside them with his hands in his pockets, his eyes soft as he watched the two most important people in his life. His face was no longer carved from cold. In its place was a calm satisfaction Scarlett had only begun to see in him over the past months. After handing Ethan to Harold to be watched, Sebastian took Scarlett's hand and led her through the house and out into the back garden. The garden spread wide with blooming rose bushes and old trees casting generous shade. He guided her into a quiet, hidden corner, where an old stone bench sat beneath a massive oak. "This is where my father used to sit with me when I was a child," Sebastian said, his voice low and filled with memory. "Before my mother took him away. Before everything went wrong." He looked up at the lush green canopy, late afternoon sunlight slipping through the leaves in shimmering bands. "I haven't come here in 20 years. It was too painful. But today, I wanted to share it with you." Scarlett looked around, feeling the peace of the place settle into her bones. "It's beautiful," she said honestly. Sebastian turned to her, and in his gray eyes Scarlett saw something deep and fierce. "It is now," he said, his voice barely more than breath, "because you're here." Then, to Scarlett's shock, Sebastian slowly lowered himself onto one knee in the soft grass. Her heart began to pound so hard she could hear it in her ears. "Sebastian, what are you?" she started, but her voice caught when he pulled a red velvet box from his suit pocket. He opened it, and inside was a diamond ring glittering in the late afternoon sun. Not a massive, showy ring of the kind people expect in upper circles, but something elegant and refined, perfect for Scarlett's small hand. "You saved my son with a pillow," Sebastian said, his voice trembling slightly with feeling. "A simple pillow that 15 world-class doctors missed. You saved me with your heart, with your honesty, with your refusal to see me as anything other than a man who needed to change." He looked up at her, gray eyes shining. "Scarlett Hayes, will you spend the rest of your life saving us? Will you be my wife, my partner, my home?" Scarlett stood there, with tears pouring down her face, helpless to stop them. But these weren't tears of misery, the kind she had cried through an unhappy childhood. These were tears of happiness, of joy, of disbelief that life had finally decided to smile at her. "I spent my whole life being nobody's choice," she said, her voice breaking. "Nobody's family. I was passed from foster home to foster home, always the one left behind, always the one who wasn't good enough." And now Sebastian rose and took her hand. "Now you're my only choice," he said with certainty. "My only family, you and Ethan. If you'll have me, with all my flaws, all my past, all my darkness." "Yes," Scarlett said, not needing to hear the rest. "Yes, I'll have you. All of you." Sebastian smiled, the brightest smile she had ever seen on his face. He slid the ring onto her finger, then stood and pulled her into his arms. Their lips met beneath the ancient oak, in the golden late afternoon light, and the world around them seemed to stop turning. A small burst of clapping broke the moment. Ethan had somehow run out into the garden, and he stood there clapping and giggling, not understanding what was happening but delighted anyway. Sebastian bent to lift him up, and the three of them held each other beneath the oak, a complete family. And in that moment, Scarlett knew she had finally found what she had been searching for her entire life. She had found home. The wedding was held in the back garden of the Thornton estate, beneath the ancient oak where Sebastian had proposed to Scarlett. It wasn't a lavish wedding with hundreds of guests from high society, not gold-plated banquet tables or million-dollar fireworks. It was a small, private ceremony, with only the people who truly mattered. Scarlett walked down a white flower-lined aisle, wearing a simple white silk wedding dress she had chosen herself at an ordinary shop in Brooklyn, not haute couture from Paris, not a custom design from a famous fashion house, just a beautiful dress that fit her, and that was all she needed. Sebastian stood at the end of the aisle in a black suit, but his eyes were only on her, as if the whole world had disappeared and there was nothing left but the woman walking toward him. Ethan, now 18 months old, was the ring-bearer. He toddled forward on short little legs, clutching a red velvet pillow that held 2 wedding rings. He almost dropped the pillow twice, making the entire wedding burst into laughter. But in the end, he completed his mission with a look of pride so serious it was funny. Camille sat in the front row, smiling at the scene before her. No bitterness, no jealousy, only relief, and real happiness at seeing her son loved, at seeing her former husband finally find true happiness. Maxwell stood beside Sebastian as best man, and for the first time in his life, someone saw this cold man smile. When it was time to speak, Sebastian took Scarlett's hand and looked into her eyes. "I spent my whole life thinking money could buy everything," he said, his voice low and full of emotion. "Power, respect, safety, Happiness. I was wrong, until I met someone who taught me that the most valuable things in life are free. Love, trust, family, and a woman who refused to take my money but gave me everything I never knew I needed. Scarlett smiled through her tears, and then it was her turn. I thought I'd never have a family, she said, her voice trembling slightly. I spent 27 years believing I was meant to be alone, that I wasn't worthy of being loved, until I found a family in the most unexpected place. In a mansion I didn't belong to, with a man I thought I could never understand, and a little boy who taught me that sometimes saving someone else is how you save yourself. After the ceremony, when the guests had gone home and the estate lay under a golden sunset, Scarlett and Sebastian walked past the garage, and there, parked right beside the gleaming black Bentley, was Scarlett's beat-up 2008 Honda Civic. The car looked the same as always, with its scratches and its cloudy headlights like tired eyes. Sebastian looked at the car, then looked at Scarlett. "You know, I can buy you any car in the world," he said. "A Ferrari, a Lamborghini, anything you want." Scarlett smiled and shook her head. "I know, but this one reminds me who I am, where I came from, what I've been through to get here." Sebastian stepped closer, wrapped his arms around her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. "It reminds me who you are," he whispered. "A woman who doesn't need my money. A woman who sees past the surface. A woman who saved my son with a pillow and saved me with her heart." He kissed her hair softly. "And that's exactly why I love you." They stood there in silence, looking out toward the garden where Ethan was playing with Camille, his clear laughter echoing in the air. Scarlett leaned back against Sebastian's chest, feeling his warmth and the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. "Sometimes, to save a life, you just need to pay attention to a simple pillow," she said gently. Sebastian nodded. "And sometimes, to find love, you just need to look beyond the surface." The sunset spread across the Thornton estate, turning gold the walls that had once been cold and gloomy. No more darkness, no more vicious secrets, no more cries of pain, only laughter and hope, and a family that had finally found one another. Today's story has ended, but the lessons from it will stay forever in our hearts. Sometimes, the most precious things in life can't be bought with money. Love, sincerity, and a caring heart. Those are the things that truly have value. Scarlett didn't have wealth or power, but she had eyes that knew how to see and a heart that knew how to love. And that was what saved a child, healed a family, and found love in the place that seemed the most impossible. If this story touched your heart, please press the like button and share this video with the people you love. Please subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the moving stories we share every day. We'd truly love to hear what you feel from the deepest part of your heart. How do you feel about this story? Which moment moved you the most? And in real life, have you ever met someone like Scarlett? Someone who sees what other people miss? Please share with us in the comments section below. Thank you sincerely for taking the time to listen to today's story. We wish all of you watching this video strong health, a joyful life, and peace every day. Remember, sometimes the one who saves you isn't the person holding millions of dollars in their hands, but the person with a kind heart and eyes that truly see. Goodbye, and we'll see you again in the next video.